Minerva had been standing at the parlor window for so long that the frost had melted under her palms where she pressed them against the glass. She had rehearsed this moment through 3 sleepless nights. What she would say, what she would not say, which parts of herself she would permit him to see, and which she would hold back like coins in a closed fist. But when the hired carriage rolled up the packed dirt road, and Ambrose Covington stepped out into the gray Pennsylvania morning, tall and careful, and carrying the leather satchel she recognized from every business trip he had ever taken, every word she had prepared left her as cleanly as breath in cold air. Breckenridge, Pennsylvania. April 1858. The spring thaw had come grudgingly that year, leaving the roads half frozen and the fields still brown under pale light. The house where Minerva had grown up, her father's house, now hers alone since his passing last summer, sat at the end of a lane lined with bare oak trees. She had not returned to the Covington estate in Chester County when her father died. She had come here instead, to the place that was genuinely hers, and she had been here 5 months, and Ambrose had not once suggested she come back. That told her most of what she needed to know about the state of their marriage. She opened the front door before he could knock. He stood on the porch step, hat in hand, and for one unguarded moment she allowed herself to look at him the way she used to. The broad set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, the expression on his face that was never quite readable and had once seemed to her like depth and now seemed like withholding. He had dressed well for this. That meant he had thought about it. "Minerva," he said. "Ambrose," she said. Neither of them moved. Then he said, "May I come in?" She stepped back from the door. He came into the parlor and stood near the fireplace, the satchel at his feet. He looked around the room the way a man looks at a place he feels responsible for, but no longer entirely comfortable in. Her father's books on the shelves, the braided rug her mother had made, the small oil lamp on the side table that Marta kept trimmed and lit every evening without being asked, out of a loyalty that was more stubborn than sentiment. "The house is well kept," he said. "I keep things well," Minerva said. "That isn't why you traveled 2 days from Chester County." He looked at her then, and something moved across his face that she couldn't name and didn't entirely trust. He opened the satchel and drew out a folded document, heavy paper, official-looking, the kind prepared by someone who knew the law and billed by the hour. "My uncle retained a solicitor," Ambrose said. "He believes, and counsel agrees, that there are grounds for a formal arrangement of separation, not a divorce, a legal settlement. The terms are generous. The house remains yours. There's a quarterly allowance." "Your uncle believes," she said. "Yes." "And what do you believe, Ambrose?" The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. "I believe," he said carefully, "that you deserve better than a marriage held together by circumstance alone." "Stop." Her voice was quiet. "Don't tell me what I deserve as though it is yours to determine. You came here with papers your uncle's lawyer drafted. Frame it however you wish, but be honest enough to hear what it sounds like." Something moved across his face. Discomfort. Or something close enough to shame that the difference didn't matter. She crossed to the hall and called for Marta. "Bring coffee, please." Ambrose looked almost startled. She had seen that expression before on men who came prepared for tears or refusal and found themselves offered hospitality instead. He sat. Marta brought the tray with the efficiency of a woman who heard everything through kitchen walls and intended to confirm nothing. And she gave Ambrose the look she reserved for people who had caused trouble and left someone else to sort it out, and she withdrew. Minerva poured. She handed him his cup. She sat across from him. "Tell me what your uncle arranged," she said. He wrapped both hands around the cup. "The house, the land, everything your father left you, stays in your name. A quarterly allowance paid by the Covington estate. More than enough to live on comfortably." He paused. "You would want for nothing practical." "Nothing practical," she repeated. "Yes. And in exchange, I become a woman whose marriage was dissolved before she is 30, because a man in Chester County decided it was inconvenient." She looked at him steadily. "Ambrose, what does your uncle gain from this arrangement?" His jaw tightened. "There is a family that has expressed interest in a connection with the Covington name. The Fairchilds, out of Philadelphia. Their daughter." "Belinda Fairchild," Minerva said. He looked at her. "I'm not foolish," she said. "I've heard your uncle mention that name twice in my presence, and 3 times through closed doors. I know what it means." She set her cup down. "Your uncle wants a match that serves the family's financial interests. That is a legitimate thing for a man like him to want. What is not legitimate is presenting it to me as a kindness. They drank their coffee. Outside, a robin was attempting an early spring song, indifferent to the difficulty unfolding in the room below it. There is also, Ambrose said finally, a woman named Belinda Fairchild who has been promised nothing and done nothing wrong, and I do not intend to. I didn't say she had, Minerva said. I have no feeling about Miss Fairchild. I have feelings about a marriage entered into in good faith, and a husband who wrote me 4 letters in 5 months, and none of them asked how I was faring alone in my dead father's house. He did not attempt to defend that. You wrote about the quarterly reports from your mill, she said. You wrote about the ice storm that damaged the Chester County roof. You asked whether I had engaged a new man of work for the property. She held his gaze. You did not once ask if I was frightened or lonely or managing. You didn't ask, Ambrose, because the asking would have required you to be present in a way that was inconvenient. You're right, he said. She had not expected that. You're right, he said again, with the particular quality of a man who has rehearsed saying something wrong for months and has finally arrived at the true version of it. I should have come in January. I should have come before any document was drafted. I knew what my uncle was planning, and I let it move forward because I didn't know what to say to you, and that is not an excuse. What stopped you? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I was afraid of what I would see in your face if I tried to explain myself. Minerva looked at him carefully. Something shifted in her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the early material of it. The recognition of a man telling the truth about something he had kept badly for too long. Ambrose, she said, do you want this marriage to be over? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. The robin outside had given up. The fire in the grate settled. The whole gray April morning seemed to hold its breath. I don't know, he said finally. It came out rough, pulled from somewhere deep. God help me, I don't know. Minerva stood. She walked to the window, not to look at anything in particular, but because she needed 6 feet of space between herself and the document on the table, and the man and the feeling pressing against the inside of her chest. She had prepared herself for yes. She had built the entire architecture of her morning around withstanding a yes. I don't know was so much harder to withstand than yes. It meant there was still something here, something unresolved and alive and requiring her to make a decision she was not yet ready to make. She pressed one hand briefly against her side, then she dropped it. I will not sign that document, she said, still facing the window, because your uncle believes it is convenient. If you want this marriage to end, Ambrose, you will have to look me in the eye and tell me so yourself. Not your uncle, not a lawyer, you. She turned back to face him. Can you do that? He opened his mouth, he closed it. No, he said. He stayed through the morning. They spoke of smaller things, the state of the mill road, the spring planting, whether the north pasture fence had held through winter, safe things. But underneath all of it, Minerva was aware of what she was not saying the way you are aware of a stone in your pocket. Not heavy enough to stop you, present enough that you never forget it. 3 weeks earlier, Dr. Colfax had sat across from her in his small office on the main street of Breckenridge, and told her, in his direct and unhurried way, that she was with child. He had said it the way country doctors say difficult things. Plainly, watching her face to see what the news would do to it. She had thanked him. She had paid for the visit from the small leather purse her father had pressed into her hands on her wedding day, saying, "Keep something that is only yours." Minnie, a woman ought always have something that is only hers. She had walked home 2 miles on the April mud and told no one. Not Marta, who would have taken the news with the gravity of a woman who understood everything and expressed it through extra helpings at supper. Not Cousin Pamela in Harrisburg, who wrote twice a month and noticed things. Not the minister's wife, who had known Minerva's mother, and checked on her with a regularity that felt like surveillance. And certainly not Ambrose. Because she understood, with the same clarity that had guided her down that muddy road, what the news would do if it reached him before she was ready. It would not bring him back for the right reasons. And Minerva had watched her own mother spend 30 years in a house where being needed had been mistaken for being loved. She had sat at her mother's bedside in the last weeks and understood, young as she was, that those were not the same thing. She would not be kept. She would not be a problem that had been managed. Ambrose left at midday with the document unsigned in his satchel. At the door he said he was staying at the Breckenridge Inn for a few days, if she wanted to talk. She watched the carriage until the lane curved and the oak swallowed it. Then she went to the kitchen and pressed both hands flat on the table, and, for the first time since her father's funeral, let herself feel exactly how afraid she was. 4 days later, a letter arrived from Broderick Covington. She recognized the handwriting, angular, deliberate, the penmanship of a man who considered character and script to be related disciplines. She had received one previous letter from Broderick, in the early months of her marriage, welcoming her to the family in language so precisely calibrated to be technically warm, while communicating nothing that she had read it twice, to be certain she hadn't missed something. She had not missed something. There had been nothing to miss. This letter was different. It expressed his concern for her health and well-being. It noted that he had become aware she had recently consulted Dr. Colfax, and wished to inquire, in the spirit of family concern, whether there was any matter pertaining to her welfare that the family ought to know about, given the current circumstances. Minerva read the letter twice. Then she folded it along its original creases, set it on the kitchen table, and breathed. He didn't know what she was carrying, but he had found out about the doctor's visit, and Broderick Covington was not a man who asked questions he didn't already suspect the answers to. He had someone asking about her. In a town of 400 people, that amounted to the same thing as watching. She wrote back, "Dear Mr. Covington, I am in good health and have no news to share at this time. Respectfully, Minerva Covington." She sealed it and asked Marta to post it. Then she thought for a long time, and the next morning she rode into Breckenridge, and went to the inn. She found Ambrose in the dining room, sitting at a corner table with an unread newspaper and a cup of cold coffee, the posture of a man whose eyes are pointed at a page while his mind is pointed somewhere else entirely. He looked up when she came in. She watched the sequence cross his face, surprise, and then something sharper, and then the controlled settling back into composure that was reflex for him by now. She sat down across from him without waiting to be invited. "Your uncle wrote to me," she said, 3 days after you came to the house. He knows about my visit to Dr. Colfax. He had someone asking questions about my movements, Ambrose. That is the man whose counsel you have been following." Ambrose was very still. "I did not tell him," he said. "I know you didn't," which means he moved on his own. He had already decided the outcome of this situation before you ever arrived at my door, and he has been managing the variables independently. She folded her hands on the table. "Did you know he was doing that?" "I knew he was interested in the outcome," Ambrose said. "I didn't ask what that interest looked like in practice." Choosing not to ask a question, because you don't want to know, the answer is still a choice. "I understand that." Then understand this as well. Whatever your uncle is planning, it is moving faster now. This situation has a timeline that is no longer entirely under my control, and I will not allow him to shape it before I am ready. She looked at him directly. "You need to decide what you actually want, Ambrose, before your uncle decides it for you." The dining room was quiet around them. 2 men at the far end discussing rail prices, noticing nothing. "There's something you're not telling me," Ambrose said. It wasn't a question. It was quiet and precise, the statement of a man who had been sitting with that suspicion for days. "Yes," she said. The word cost her something, and she let it. "There is, but I won't tell you today. Not until I understand where you stand, not what your uncle has decided where you stand." "How do I prove that to you?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'll recognize it when I see it." She stood, smoothed the front of her coat, and looked at him one final time. This man she had married in good faith, who had come back with a lawyer's document, who had said "I don't know" with a rawness that had followed her 3 miles down a muddy road, and was still following her now. "Your uncle's letter arrives before you do," she said. "That tells me everything about how this has been handled. Start handling it differently, Ambrose, or there will be nothing left to handle." She walked out. She was halfway down the main street when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She didn't stop, she kept her pace and waited. He came up alongside her on the bay horse he'd hired from the livery, matching her pace without pulling ahead, looking forward at the street rather than at her. The way men sometimes deliver the most important things they have to say, sideways to the air, as though direct delivery is more than they can manage. "I wrote to him," Ambrose said. 4 days ago, the night I left your house. I told him the matter was mine to resolve and I didn't need further involvement. I told him the solicitor was dismissed and the separation arrangement was not moving forward on his timeline." Minerva kept walking. She turned this over twice, making herself be careful about what it meant and what it didn't. "You wrote before you knew about his letter to me," she said. Yes. Before you knew, he'd had someone asking questions about my movements. Yes. A full block passed between them in silence. Why? She asked. He was quiet for several paces. Then, because sitting across from you in that parlor made me understand that I had been letting other people define what was happening between us, and calling it reason. It wasn't reason. A pause. It was cowardice. The word came out plain and unembellished, the way honest men say the things they've had to earn the right to say. Minerva recognized it for what it was. Not a performance of contrition, but the actual thing. They reached the edge of town where the lane forked. He stopped the horse. This doesn't resolve everything, she said. No, he agreed, it doesn't. There are things I haven't told you. Things that will change the shape of all of this. I understand. You don't yet, she looked at him, but you will, when I'm ready. He held her gaze with that direct, full attention she had catalogued in the first months of their marriage, and valued in ways she had never quite said aloud. Then let me be here when you are, he said. She looked back at the road and walked the rest of the way home alone. He didn't follow. That too, she filed away. He found the letter 2 days later. Not the letter Broderick had sent to Minerva. A different one, written in Ambrose's name, which Ambrose had not written. He found it tucked inside the satchel's interior pocket, beneath the separation document, where it had presumably been placed before he ever left Chester County. He recognized his uncle's handwriting immediately. He recognized the signature at the bottom, close enough to his own that a man not looking carefully would not catch the difference. The letter was addressed to Franklin Fairchild, Belinda Fairchild's father. In it, in Ambrose's name, in Ambrose's voice, was a formal confirmation of his intention to pursue a courtship of Miss Fairchild upon the resolution of his current marital situation, expressing anticipation of a union at the earliest appropriate opportunity, referencing specific financial arrangements. It was dated 6 weeks ago, before Ambrose had ever ridden to Breckenridge, before he had stepped onto Minerva's porch with the satchel in his hand and the reasonable conviction that he was making his own decision. He read it sitting on the edge of the inn bed, then he read it again. He put on his coat. He rode to Crestwood Lane at a pace that was not a gallop, but contained everything a controlled man allows himself instead of one. Minerva heard the horse before Marta did. She came to the front room when she heard his steps on the porch, and opened the door before he knocked, and she took one look at his face. What happened? He came inside and drew the letter from his coat and held it out without a word. She took it. She read it once more. He signed your name, she said. Close enough that the Fairchilds would not question it. Close enough I might not have questioned it myself, if I hadn't been looking for the difference. His voice was level and precise and entirely devoid of the heat she could hear pressing against the underside of it. He committed you to a second arrangement before the first one was legally resolved, she said. He placed this in your satchel before you left Chester County. You were never making your own choice, Ambrose. You were being handed the conclusion he had already written. No, he said quietly, I wasn't. She set the letter on the table. She stood with her hands folded and felt something she had not expected. Fury on his behalf, clean and hot and entirely different in character from the anger she had been carrying for herself these past months. How long has he been doing this? She asked. Ambrose was quiet for a moment. Since my father died, he said. It came out quieter than the rest. I was 24. He stepped in, and he was useful, and he had strong opinions about what should happen with the estate and with me. And I let him because it was easier than the alternative. He looked at the letter on the table. I kept letting him because I told myself that deferring to his judgment was wisdom. It wasn't. No, she said, it wasn't. She looked at him for a long moment. What will you do? I'm going to Philadelphia, he said. I'm going to find my own lawyer, not my uncle's, not the family's, mine, and I'm going to have this letter examined, and I'm going to understand exactly what legal exposure exists. And then I'm going to have a conversation with my uncle that will not be comfortable for either of us. He paused. I need you to know something before I go. He held her gaze. I am not going because of whatever you haven't told me yet. I am going because my uncle forged my name to a document and positioned me in a situation I did not choose, and that is not something I am willing to permit regardless of anything else. This is about who I am and what I will accept in my own life. She believed him. She had learned, in the better part of a year of marriage, to read the difference between Ambrose performing conviction and Ambrose possessing it. This was the second kind. Quiet and absolute and not new. The conviction of a man who had been working his way towards something for some time and had finally arrived. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. "A week, perhaps 10 days. A pause. I'll write real letters, Minerva, not about mill accounts." Something moved through her that she had been managing for months, compressing and refusing to name. She pressed it down one more time. "See that you do," she said. From Philadelphia arrived 6 days later. 3 pages in Ambrose's careful hand, detailing what his lawyer, a man named Emmett Cross, had found. The forged letter carried sufficient evidence of Broderick's authorship to constitute grounds for legal action. The Fairchild family had been formally notified that the commitment represented in the document was unauthorized and would not be honored. Franklin Fairchild, Ambrose wrote, had been more disturbed than angry, and had sent his regards to Minerva, which Ambrose said he had found surprising. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in handwriting looser and quicker than the rest, the handwriting of a man writing from somewhere below his usual composure, he had added, "I read the forged letter again in Cross's office and understood for the first time what my uncle actually believes about me, that I am a piece on a board that can be moved without consultation. I am past the anger now. I am in something quieter that I don't entirely have words for yet. I thought you should know I am all right. Not the version of all right I was performing in your parlor. The kind that comes from having made a decision that is entirely my own. I will explain better when I return." Minerva read the postscript 4 times. Then she locked it inside her father's writing desk, in the small drawer, where she kept the things that mattered most, and she went back to her morning. Marta noticed, of course. "You're humming," Marta said 2 mornings after the letter arrived, without looking up from the bread she was shaping. "I'm thinking," Minerva said. "You're humming while thinking." Marta turned the dough with the equanimity of a woman who had seen a great deal and was satisfied by very little. "You haven't done that since before your father took ill." Minerva didn't argue. Ambrose returned on a Thursday. 1 bag this time, not the satchel. The expression of a man who had done something genuinely difficult, and was carrying it plainly, neither celebrating nor recovering. She opened the door. He stood on the porch in the April morning, hatless. "The forged letter creates significant legal exposure for my uncle," he said, because they had been corresponding for 10 days and pleasantries felt beside the point. "He will not push further on the Fairchild matter. Too much to lose if it becomes public, and he knows it." "And the Fairchilds?" "Franklin Fairchild is a reasonable man. He was disturbed to discover he'd been used as a piece in someone else's arrangement. His exact words." He paused. "He sent his regards to you." "He would," she said. "A man who realizes he's been managed tends to feel a certain solidarity with others in the same position. Come in." He came in. No document on the table this time, no satchel by the door. Just the morning light through the parlor windows and 2 cups of water, because it was, finally, warm enough to feel like spring. They sat. And Minerva looked at the man she had married. Careful, deliberate, just now learning to tell the difference between his judgment and his uncle's. And she made the decision she had been making in pieces since the walk home from Dr. Colfax's office. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Not the beginning of it. All of it." "All right. I'm with child." The silence that followed was the longest she had ever sat inside. Not the blank, airless silence of something completely unexpected. It was the silence of a man confronting the difference between suspecting something and actually knowing it. The way those 2 experiences, which seem identical from a distance, are nothing alike up close. Ambrose did not move. He did not look away. He sat with both hands on the table, and his face doing something deep and contained, something happening in the place below the surface where the real things in him lived. "How far along?" he asked. His voice was careful and low. "Dr. Colfax confirmed it 3 weeks before you arrived with the separation papers. He estimated approximately 18 weeks at that time, based on when we were last together." She kept her voice even. "The child was conceived before you left Breckenridge in November. The arithmetic is straightforward." He absorbed that. She watched him do it. The November departure, the months of letters about mill accounts, the April morning he had stood on her porch with a lawyer's document, and the best intentions a coward could arrange. "You knew," he said slowly, "when I came here with the papers. You knew the entire time I was in this house." "Yes." He exhaled, one long, uncontrolled breath that carried something enormous inside it. The sound of a man's entire understanding of a situation completely restructuring itself. Why didn't you tell me? She had worked this out on the 2-mile walk home from Dr. Colfax's office. She had worked it out in every sleepless night since, in every morning when she had pressed her hands on the table and counted what she had. She had not worked it out to make it smooth. She had worked it out to make it accurate. Because I knew what you would do, she said. I knew the moment I told you, you would close that satchel and say we would work it out, and you would mean it. In that moment, she held his gaze. And 3 months from now, or a year, or 5 years, you would look at me and wonder whether you stayed because you chose to, or because I left you no other choice. And you would never fully know, Ambrose, and neither would I. She looked at him directly. I have watched women spend their whole lives being kept in houses, in arrangements, in situations that were never their own choice, because information or obligation made any other path impossible. My mother was kept. I loved her and I will not live her life. She held his gaze. I will not be the woman who trapped you. Not even with the truth. His jaw worked. Something was moving through him that she could see in the stillness of his hands on the table, in the deliberate way he was breathing. Minerva, he said. He stopped, started again. You sat in this room and listened to me explain quarterly allowances and Belinda Fairchild and procedural separations. Yes. While you were carrying my child. Yes. Something in his face broke open. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way things break when the pressure has built long enough. Along a seam that was always there, finally given enough to give. He stood, not in anger. She knew his anger, and this was not it. He stood because he could not hold what he was feeling and remain seated. He crossed to the window as she had crossed to this same window weeks ago, and stood with his back to her. She let him. She had given him a hard truth and he was owed the time to hold it. You still could have told me, he said to the window. Any other woman in this county would have told me the moment I came through the door. My uncle expected you to tell me. That's why he sent someone to find out about the doctor, so he could know what you knew before you used it. He turned back to face her. Why didn't you? Because being chosen is not the same as being necessary, she said. I wanted you to choose me, Ambrose. I didn't want to make myself necessary and spend the rest of my life wondering if it was the same thing. He crossed back from the window and stood near the table, close enough that she had to tilt her face up slightly to hold his eyes, and he looked at her. The direct, full attention she had catalogued in the first months of their marriage, and valued in ways she had never quite said aloud. I need you to hear something, he said. I'm listening. I came here 5 weeks ago with that document, he said. I sat in this room and told you about the separation arrangement and the quarterly allowance and Belinda Fairchild. I had convinced myself it was the practical thing, the kind thing. He paused. And you sat across from me and you did not cry, and you did not beg, and you did not use what you knew to stop me. And I have spent 5 weeks thinking about why that was the most unsettling thing that has ever happened to me. She looked at him. Because it meant I had already made peace with losing this marriage. Because it meant, he said, that you valued your own dignity more than you valued keeping me. That is not something a woman does if she was ever trying to trap someone. He held her gaze. My uncle believes differently. My uncle is wrong. My uncle has spent his entire life believing that every woman who marries into money has a strategy. Because that is the only framework he has for understanding why a woman would want anything at all. His voice had an edge now, not directed at her, the contained pressure of a man who has understood something about himself that he did not enjoy understanding. And I have been letting him frame this situation. I have been letting him frame you. That is inexcusable, Minerva. I am not going to dress it up as anything less. She looked at him for a long moment. This child is real, she said carefully. And my telling you does not obligate you. I want to be clear about that. I'm not telling you so that you will stay. I'm telling you so that you can make an actual choice with actual information, for the first time since any of this began. He looked at her for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, and if I choose to stay, you will not let me manage you. No. You will tell me when I am wrong. Yes. You will hold opinions about the estate accounts and the quarterly reports and every decision that affects this land. I will expect to be included in them, she said. Yes. Something moved across his face, quick, involuntary, gone before she could fully read it. Then he reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his, the same way he had once covered it on a courthouse step 4 years ago when they were two strangers attempting good faith. Simply, without theater, because it was true. Then let me, he said. Let me stay, let me be the husband I should have been since November. She looked at their hands, then at his face. You're already here, she said. You went to Philadelphia, you wrote to your uncle, you stood in this room and told me the truth about yourself. Those are not words, Ambrose. Those are things. A pause that held everything she was not yet ready to fully say. All right. Not the careful, provisional all right of April. The full and decided all right of a woman who has all the information and clear eyes and her own complete agency, and has chosen anyway. Broderick arrived the following week without warning. They heard the larger carriage from the porch, and Ambrose took his place beside her. Not in front of her, not slightly behind, beside her. As his uncle descended and straightened to his full height, the posture of a man who had never had cause to be uncertain about anything. He looked at Ambrose. He looked at Minerva. He read the way they were standing in the time it took him to cross the yard. I received your letter, he said to Ambrose. Then you know my position. I know what you wrote. He stopped at the porch steps. What a man writes and what he means are not always the same thing. In this case they are, Ambrose said. Broderick looked at Minerva, the full, assessing attention of a man taking measure. I also know about the child, he said. My physician in Philadelphia corresponds with Dr. Colfax on county health matters. Minerva did not flinch. Then you know more than Ambrose did when he arrived at this house with your lawyer's documents, she said evenly. And you found it out through channels I did not consent to. She tilted her head. I wonder, Mr. Covington, whether your own solicitor would find that detail as interesting as I do. A silence. Something in Broderick's expression shifted, not alarm, but recalculation, a reassessment of what he was dealing with. You are your father's daughter, he said finally. In every way that matters, she said. He looked at Ambrose. You should have told me. I'm telling you now, Ambrose said. We're keeping the marriage. Minerva is carrying my child. The separation arrangement is finished, and whatever you promise the Fairchilds, I trust you will unmake it with the same efficiency you used to make it. Broderick was quiet for a moment. Then he inclined his head. A single, minimal acknowledgement in the direction of a concession he was not yet ready to name, and walked back to the carriage. At the gate he stopped without turning. The child carries the Covington name, he said. To the heir, to his driver, to no one in particular. That is all that concerns me. And he left. They stood on the porch until the carriage disappeared around the lane's bend. That is not over, Ambrose said. No, she agreed, but he walked away without a legal threat or a new offer. For Broderick, that means he's recalculated. He's decided this outcome is acceptable. She looked at him, not preferred, acceptable. He will work within it. You read him very quickly, Ambrose said. I read people quickly, she said. It's one of the things about me your uncle finds troublesome. She looked back at the empty road. It's also, I expect, the thing that will eventually make him respect me. Not today. But eventually. The baby came in August, on a Tuesday afternoon, with the practical efficiency of a child who had decided on an arrival time and saw no reason to deviate from it. Marta managed everything with the authority of a woman who had attended many births and found the accompanying drama largely unnecessary. She came to the door after 2 hours and told Ambrose, who had been pacing the hallway with the focused restlessness of a man who was very good at solving problems and had been handed one he couldn't, that it was a boy, and that both were fine, and that he could come in. He sat beside the bed. He looked at his son, red-faced, certain of his own importance despite being approximately 3 hours old, and then at Minerva, who was tired in the profound and particular way of a woman who has done something extremely hard and has not yet had time to fully believe it is done. He has your expression, Ambrose said. He is 3 hours old, Minerva said. He doesn't have any expression. He has the one that says he has already decided something and intends to hold to it. He looked at her. I recognize it. She looked at her son, then at her husband. She thought about her mother and the things that go unsaid in houses where love is present but invisible. She thought about the walk home from Dr. Colfax's office and the decision she had made on that walk, and every morning since when she had pressed her hands flat on the table and counted what she had. She thought about how long she had been so determined not to be kept that she had nearly missed the difference between being kept and being chosen. Ambrose, she said. Yes. I love you, she said. I have loved you for longer than I have said so. I didn't say it because I needed to understand the difference between you choosing me and you having no other option. I needed to see which one it was. He looked at her for a long time, his face doing the unguarded thing she had learned not to look away from. The full, open thing, without management or performance. I know the difference, he said quietly. I chose you the morning I came to your door, and could not say yes when you asked me whether I wanted this marriage to be over. It was never what I wanted. Not once. He covered her hand with his. The same simple gesture as always, unchanged. The one that had never required theater to mean something. All right, she said. Not the careful, provisional all right of April. Not the beginning of something, all right of the weeks that followed. The full and final all right of a woman who has all the information, and clear eyes, and her own complete agency, and has chosen anyway. In the years that followed, when people in Breckenridge spoke of the Covingtons of Crestwood Hill, they did not speak of the separation papers, or the forged letter, or Broderick's 3 visits that spring. They spoke of the family itself, of the way Ambrose had moved his entire professional operation from Chester County to Breckenridge, because his wife had asked to be included in the decisions that affected her land. And he had said yes without needing to be persuaded twice. They spoke of the reading room Minerva had established at the Methodist Church Hall, stocked with her father's books and expanded every year by donations she solicited from people who understood, as she did, that a woman who could read was a woman considerably harder to manage. They spoke of the Sunday dinners at Crestwood Hill, where millworkers and merchants sat at the same tables, which was Minerva's idea, which Ambrose had implemented without ceremony. Broderick Covington came every Thanksgiving, until his health made travel impossible. He sat in the parlor and argued with Minerva about railroad policy and county governance and matters of principle, and she was one of the very few people he had encountered in his life who could present him with a fact he had not accounted for, and make him genuinely reconsider a position he had held for 30 years. He never said he had been wrong about April 1858. He never needed to. The evidence was in every room of the house, and Broderick Covington was too fundamentally honest to pretend the evidence wasn't conclusive. On his last Thanksgiving visit, he sat in the chair by the parlor window and watched Minerva across the room, where she was reading aloud to their boy, who was 10 now, and argumentative and absolutely certain of himself in the way that his mother had always been certain, with the additional confidence of a child who had been raised by 2 people who had learned, at considerable cost, the difference between love built from obligation and love freely chosen, and had chosen the second kind loudly and on purpose. Your father would have liked her, Broderick said to Ambrose. I know, Ambrose said. He would have told you that you were a fool for taking as long as you did. He would have been right. He usually was, Broderick said, and drank his coffee and said nothing else. And outside the November wind moved through the bare oak trees on Crestwood Lane, and the boy argued about the story, and Minerva laughed, and the house held the particular warmth of a life that had not simply happened, but had been built, chosen deliberately by 2 people who understood the difference, and had kept on choosing every day since. That was the only kind worth building. Minerva had understood that since she was a girl standing at her mother's grave in a Pennsylvania spring, making a promise to herself that she fully intended to keep,